Hi, I'm Mac McCarthy, and I help people with their breakups. Let me know if you like it. I'm going to do some more stuff like this. If you are going through a breakup right now, go ahead and visit writemac.com, WRITEMAC.com. Send your story, and I can give you my take on that. Otherwise, have a good one.
So let's talk about the honeymoon phase. Let's unpack this a little bit, maybe. So what's your take on it? What do you think it is? A year to 2 years, or where do you go with it?
Depends on the attachment style. So
okay.
The aspect of attachment, without going too deep into the rabbit hole, because it could easily turn into a 3 to 4 hour topic. The way that we grow up, specifically with our relationship with our caregivers, has a very deep impact in the type of relationships that we tend to be attracted to later on. So if we want to really get into the nitty and gritty, when we were cavemen, depending on where we were geographically, there were certain advantages and disadvantages. So if I lived in, let's say, during the Ice Age, being isolated and going out and hunting and essentially being secluded had some benefits to it, rather than being a large community, because the more mouths you have to feed, the less likely you are to survive.
Sure.
Versus if you, let's say, grew up in a society like Mesopotamia, which is the foundation of civilization, where it was abundant farmland, abundant food, there were certain benefits to being in a larger community. And that's sort of spread into our culture, specifically in our relationships with our caregivers, because people that are secure tend to be more associated to that large community, while all the people that tend to be avoidant or dismissive tend to be more attuned to that Ice Age mentality.
I've never heard of it said this way before. This is interesting, the way you're explaining it, because I've read about it before, but not in this particular light. So go ahead, continue. I'm interested.
Yeah, so basically when it comes to relationships, depending on whether your parents were dismissive, secure, avoidant, fearful, whatever have you, you're going to relate differently to the people that you connect with. And 3 types of people you tend to get attracted to whenever you enter a relationship. The first is the type of relationship that seems familiar. So oftentimes if you grew up with an avoidant dad, or, God forbid, an abusive dad, guess what you're going to be attracted to later on? You're going to be attracted to an abusive or an avoidant person. The second aspect has to do with people that represent parts of ourselves that we have yet to develop, which is why you often have 2 attachment styles that are contradictory, liking each other. This is how we get avoidance dating, anxious, preoccupied, and so on and so forth. And then the third type is whenever you have a mixture of the first 2, which in my opinion is probably the most toxic and the most potent. So what you have is you have people that will tell each other that they love each other within 3 weeks of dating one another, and the relationship progresses really, really quickly. The problem is that depending on your attachment, you aren't so keen on opening up your emotions, especially if you're someone like an avoidant, for example, who has grown up around a parent who, let's say, didn't reinforce the value of being cared for, the value of being loved. And any kind of emotional vulnerability is a trigger. It's a fear-based response. So my immediate reaction to someone saying, I love you, is get the hell away from me. I want nothing to do with you. And what will happen with contradictory attachment styles, let's say if you're with someone who's anxious versus someone who's fearful, the person that's anxious is very keen on building that connection. So they'll enter the honeymoon phase right away. And the person that's fearful is a little bit hesitant, like maybe it takes a couple weeks to a couple of months for them to really open up, but they'll also enter the honeymoon phase. But they'll also be quicker to exit out of it. And then you get into things like the power struggle phase, which is usually the next phase that follows in relationships. So a person that's fearful or a person that's dismissive might be in a mindset where they're just wanting to gain their independence, while someone who's anxious is really keen on keeping that honeymoon phase alive. And this is where a lot of those conflicts come from.
Okay, so first of all, that was a lot of information. That was good. I haven't heard it laid out that way before, because when I read about attachment styles, one thing that threw me off, and you're actually incorporating the way you're talking about it, is I felt like I'm not one of those. I feel like I could be multiple of those. But I felt like the way I read it, and some people that come to me in breakups will go, well, they never say I'm a mix. They usually say I'm one. And but what I would say, let me ask your opinion on this, since you seem very well versed in this. would you say that different experiences, just like a traumatic moment in the past that maybe a trigger later on, would spark different attachment styles in an individual?
Attachment styles can be generated with one of two experiences, in my opinion, and depending on who you read, there's different interpretations of it. Mm-hmm. But going back to what you were saying, attachment styles are a range. So you can have someone who's, let's say, 50% fearful, 50% or 20% avoidant, and 30% secure. There's all different mindsets that we find ourselves in depending on the circumstances. But most importantly, the people that we surround ourselves with, specifically when we date someone who's an opposite extreme of ourselves, it gets incredibly easy to trigger something. So a person can be only 20% anxious, but if they're around the wrong kind of person or there's a lot of conflict there, what will happen is that person gets excessively triggered and becomes more and more anxious. And this is how attachment styles change based on environment, which is why it's so important to have instilled boundaries, to have sense of self-dependence, but also have interconnection in relationships, because you don't want to go the opposite extreme where, a lot of these like red pill, black pill people go, where they say relationships are temporary and they're completely biological. And, it's only a matter of time before someone abandons you.
They're projecting their relationship.
Exactly. And that's the aspect that we want to avoid. We don't want to get into that mindset of the sperm war that you laughed at. Sperm Wars was a book that was released, I believe, in the 90s that talked about the aspect of what the biological consequences are of modern day society. So like one of the things that it talked about was, why is it that men and women climax more when they don't have consistent sex for long periods of time when they've had consistent sex for short periods of time? So let's say you're having sex with someone every day and then you won't see them for a month and then you have sex with them again and it becomes like really intense orgasm.
Okay.
And they looked into this. And the reason that this happens, and this is where people get triggered, is that men produce more sperm when they haven't seen their female counterpart in a long time. The reason that this happens is because women tend to cheat. and men's biological systems, knowing fully well that the women, historically speaking, throughout our history, do have that tendency, produce more sperm, which causes more of a climax to happen during sex. So there's all these biological, I guess you could say, reinforcements that are instilled in us to survive and replicate, but to also build an emotional bond. And again, this goes back to the whole attachment and what kind of upbringing you have. Mm-hmm. It's important to have an understanding of where your limitations are. Like, no one's perfect. So it's important for us to not only be humble, but to also be empathetic. Like, just because I'm dating someone who's, let's say, an avoidant who, 90% of the time drives me insane, doesn't necessarily mean they're a bad person. But it does mean that we have different interpretations. And because human beings are so stubborn in their emotions and the way they feel, and, men tend to be logical, women tend to be emotional in their rationality, mm-hmm. It causes all kinds of problems. But in the end, as long as, there is somewhat of a level of communication and a promotion on both sides to make it work, you can make it work. But it takes that consistency.
Do you think it's a problem when someone's reads up on this? What I like about what you're saying is that you believe, because I'm a big proponent of environment being underrated by some people by how much it affects you if you're in a new environment, and you're saying that the environment can definitely change the attachment style. Is that correct?
In fact, it does change the attachment style.
Okay.
In my case, it's changed it like 4 times. So when I, just to give you a quick summary of my upbringing without going too deep down the rabbit hole, I grew up in a narcissistic household. So
meaning both parents were narcissistic? I'm sorry to interrupt. Is that what you mean?
One parent was narcissistic.
Okay.
But the other was more of a codependent.
Okay.
And in those specific cases, I grew up with an understanding of what it was like to feel love. And one of the things was I thought that true affection didn't exist. Like, I would watch TV shows, and like on those TV shows or those sitcoms where the mom and dad tell the kids that they love each other, and there's high levels of affection,
and growing pains or something.
Exactly. I grew up thinking that was fake. Like, that was my mentality. And it wasn't until I got to my first year of university where I was in residence, and I'll never forget this. I had a roommate named Cal, And his parents are hugging him. They're like, "We love you, son. We've missed you so much." And I'm looking at this. I'm like, "Oh, this shit actually exists. Like, this is an actual thing." And of course, for the first, like, I would say, into my early 20s, the first half of that aspect was me being borderline fearful. It was just me not having a good understanding of what my attachment was and how I related to the world. And slowly through my experiences, I went from fearful to dismissive to anxious to back to dismissive. And now in the last year or so, I've settled on secure. But it took a long journey of experience and reflection and self-education to get there. It's not easy, but it's definitely worth it.
That's deep. Yeah, I believe that the fact that I like your idea of the fact that it can change. I'm just wondering with everything on the internet and so many videos on this and stuff, I just find that just like if someone gets a scratch on their arm and it changes the color and they go on there and they go, "Oh my God, I think I need to get a tetanus shot," or like you try to be a doctor through the internet. It's the same thing almost with someone will go, "Okay, I'm a secure attachment style and you're an ancient avoidant," to their partner. But then when they identify their partner that way, are they pigeonholing their partner in a way that anytime something goes wrong, they go, "Oh yeah, you're an avoidant attachment." That's where it becomes negative, right?
Well, like my last relationship prior to this one, I dated an avoidant, and I would like to consider that when her and I were dating, at least initially, I came off as really secure, and I was secure. But over time, just based on our interactions and the hot and cold behavior, you can't be around that for extended periods of time and not have some kind of element of impact on your psyche.
Oh yeah,
no one is susceptible to that.
Yeah, I agree.
And I found myself incredibly anxious. Like my most popular video, and I hate to even mention it because it cringes me so much, is a video where I talk about avoidance and love. And at the end of the video, I give a speech where I become really emotional. Like I start crying because that breakup was so fresh, and I knew that this was going to be the only moment in my adult life where I could actually categorize and catalog what it was like to go through a breakup where it was so intense. So I purposely put some things up where I talked about it. But the element is that I came out of that relationship incredibly anxious, much more so than usual. And a lot of that has to do with the communication I had with this person that I dated. Now, do I think she's a malicious person? No, I don't think she's malicious. But there was definitely an element where, depending on what your attachment is, you're going to be much more resistant to change. So the thing that I've noticed in my coaching practices, and I'm not sure if it's the same with you,
sure,
is with avoidance, they don't tend to become self-aware until their early 40s. And it's only because what tends to happen is because they put so much emotional distance between the people that they interact with, that what actually happens is, you know how we all go through a mourning period, regardless of whether you're the dumper or the dumpy in a relationship. Because avoidants have been so conditioned to suppress their emotions, what actually happens is they actually don't feel the grieving process until about 6 months to a year later. And there's been so much time that's been passed since the breakup that they don't see that connect. So what will happen is an avoidant might approach me and say, "I suffer from seasonal depression." And I'll be like, "Okay, well, why don't you tell me about that?" And they'll say, "Well, I dated my boyfriend last year, and for some reason last year I didn't have this depression, but now I do have this depression." And then we start talking about the relationship. And then as we start digging deeper into it, the waterworks start coming out, and they start realizing, "Oh, wow, this is an actual trigger." But they've been so conditioned to suppress those emotions because the household they grew up in either didn't support emotions, or maybe they didn't have the right upbringing, or maybe they've been dealt a traumatic experience. The result is, in order for them to be self-aware, they usually have to find themselves in isolation. And avoidants in particular tend to be incredibly superficial for this reason, because they recognize that although they aren't prone to the emotional connection, they definitely want to build some kind of connection. And the only way they can build that kind of connection is one that doesn't emotionally trigger them, which is, of course, that superficial aspect. So they will usually go to the gym obsessively. They will work obsessively. Very, very high ambition levels, I will say. But then they get into their 40s and they realize, oh, wow, I've done all this. I've built my career. I'm sexually active. I'm physically attractive. But that's now slowly starting to go away, and I have no friends. And I don't know why. So
this is an extreme version of what you're saying. Like, this would be someone that's like 100%er.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
right?
Somewhere in the 90%er. Exactly. But most people, like, I would say the most keen people that are likely to change tend to be the anxious attachment, because they tend to recognize what their emotions are bringing out.
When you said that you ended your relationship and you felt really anxious, can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by that? Because I know the word anxious, but I mean, in what way?
I would say probably unloved. Isolated, abandoned is a big word. Like, my element is that because I've grown up in a narcissistic household, a lot of the reinforcements I've had to develop, externally. So I don't have an immediate relationship with my family, at least my immediate nuclear family. With my extended family, I love them to death. But my nuclear family, like, I have 3 sisters. I haven't spoken to them in several years. Mom and dad, I haven't spoken to them in several years. And the result of that is just based on the abuse that partake growing up. Now, the problem is that when you're in a relationship with someone who's dismissive, who's giving you a lot of hot and cold behavior, you're triggering that. You're triggering that experience over and over and over. And it's not to say that I haven't, gone to therapy and talked about it. It's been done, and it's continuing to be done. But the element is that when you're constantly around that reminder, it's going to be a deep and traumatic experience. So when I was going through that breakup, it wasn't that I was experiencing the loss of that particular person. It was that I was experiencing an entire lifetime of neglect and
you're saying
abandonment.
You're saying it brings back to the surface stuff that you maybe buried away for a bit, and it comes back up, right? So it's a culmination.
Exactly.
It's a culmination of similar experiences. Is that accurate?
Cumulation of similar experiences, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially the more intense the experience.
Yeah. It's kind of, so when did you start diving into, since you're a poli-sci major, when did you start getting really deep into this? Is it after, because I mean, you're definitely well-versed and well-read, so when did you start really kind of diving into stuff like this? Because obviously you've read quite a bit on the avoidant attachment styles and whatnot, but what triggered you to get into this?
Well, the attachment styles I had read on previous occasions, but they didn't really hit at home until this past year. But like for most of my adolescence, like I would say throughout my 20s, I had a really big issue with anger management.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know why at the time. But I later came to realize, both through therapy and self-education, that a lot of that anger came from resentment of not having a proper upbringing, not having proper love at home or proper reinforcement. In fact, most of my interactions at home were usually a form of criticism or a form of abuse. Not to toot my own horn, I don't like playing the victim, but I'm going to put it out there and say this is what I
didn't know. I didn't think you presented it in that way, but I know what you mean, because there's so many people that do that, right? It's like, well, this and this.
Exactly.
Right.
Like, and I see people like in the comments talking about CPTSD. Yeah, exactly. Complex post-traumatic stress. And I slowly, as thanks indirectly to the result of me being engaged to a covert narcissist, where all this stuff came to the surface, and I literally had a breakdown and forced myself to get therapy after many, many years of neglect. It all started to make sense, and slowly I started building some courage in myself and understanding myself, and most importantly, to forgive myself for a lot of the neglect I was dealt. And this is where a lot of the people I help tend to be stuck on, because a lot of these people that I personally coach, and I don't know what the case is with your audience, but the people I coach tend to come from broken families. And because there's such an emphasis on a red flag, like, oh, he doesn't talk to his parents, that means there's something wrong with him. Well, not necessarily. Like, I've told my exes in the past, well, grow up in a toxic relationship with your folks and see what kind of relationship you have with them after 20 or 30 years. It's a hard pill to swallow. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that people don't realize, when you interact with enough people, not just breakups, right? If you interact like I've been a teacher for years. I've had a lot of different jobs. I've lived in different places, just meeting a wide range of people, but now doing coaching for a few years and meeting a lot of people on a deeper level. What's interesting about talking to someone that you've never met before for an hour or 2 hours, I don't want to say you just get close, but you get deep really quick, right? Like when you're talking to these people. But you know what I've realized is everyone's so unique in their interpretations. And what you don't realize, what I've come to realize is that, like, let's just say you meet someone that's just an asshole, right? Let's not even use the word narcissist. Let's just go old school, asshole, right? You know what I mean? It's like, this guy's a fucking asshole. You know what I mean? Like, whatever, or a jerk. But when you get deeper, you're like, this person wasn't born that way. Or they probably don't even know. Sometimes they don't even know they're doing it, and there were some ingredients thrown in there, life experience wise, that made them this way. And you also don't know what they went through to be this way, and that's where you get like, shit, man. Like when I talk to people, until you get really deep, you don't know why people do what they do, and you just assume, what an idiot, what an asshole, what a jerk. But when you look back at maybe the way they were raised or a life experience, I mean, I know, to be candid, I never had a deep depression before or something like that. And that's a very common thing now, right? I mean, it's a battle for a lot of people out there. And so sometimes it's hard for me to understand how people aren't coming out of it. But then when you talk to them about their experiences and why they're there, it becomes much more clear. But from the surface, someone just hears, oh, someone's being depressed again, or being a victim, or this or that. And then you get into it, and, all paths lead to now. And then you get deeper, and you're just like, wow, everyone's so intricate based on their experiences. It's just like, if you think parents count, right? I was just talking to a coaching client about this. Parenting counts a lot. But your life experiences outside, like let's say you had great parents, Clutch, and everything went right, and it was, like the kid that you went to college with and all that stuff. You could still be 15 years old and some kid down the street introduced you to crack cocaine. It's possible. It's like, yes. It's possible that you could have good parents make wrong moves based on environment, friends, and those things. And so it's like all the experiences culminate. They really do, into someone becoming who they are. And I wonder, if you think about someone, is it their fault who they are, or is it just a reality of them just going through life without ever getting self-reflection or possibly therapy, or having a moment to catch their breath and look at things? Obviously, you've done that, because it takes an honest self-assessment, and that's what I think a breakup does for someone. It's like, if you're at ground zero, it's a really good time to look at yourself and just go, okay, what do I want to do? Right?
Definitely. Yeah, no, definitely. Like,